This is In the Trenches, broadcast 16.
Welcome to In the Trenches, where entrepreneurs, artists, writers, designers, inventors, warriors, and leaders share their stories of doing the hard, creative work that impacts all of our lives. Let the journey inspire you to do something worthwhile, build something bold, and create your life's work. And now, your host, Tom Morkis.
Welcome back, everyone, to another broadcast of In the Trenches. Today's guest is best-selling fiction writer Jason Andrew Bond. Jason is the author of Hammerhead, a book with 105 five-star reviews on Amazon as of this interview. He's also the author of the book Mortal Remains and a new short story called Iron Crow, which I recently read and reviewed and really enjoyed. After the success of Hammerhead, Jason decided to give 25% of profit from all of sales of Hammerhead to support disabled U.S. veterans. And I think it really speaks to Jason's character. So I'm just very thankful to have Jason on the call today. So Jason, thank you so much for being on the call with us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I'd like to just know a little bit more about your background and how you got started writing.
Well, I started out wanting to write when I was 11 years old. I wrote my first short story at 11. It was called The No Thanksgiving. It was all about pirates coming to London in the olden times on Thanksgiving Day. I gave it to my dad to have him read it, and he turned around and he said, "Well, there's no Thanksgiving in England." So I got my first critic along with my first short story. But
I like it.
Yeah, so ever since then, I've been playing around with short stories and as a hobby on the side, and it's been something I've been passionate about for a long time.
Okay, so when did you? Was Hammerhead then your first book?
Hammerhead was my first book. Now, I'd always wanted to be a writer, so I'd written short stories. I had stuff in high school. I took creative fiction in high school. Had a great instructor named Robert Baldwin, not to be confused with the famous writer, but. And then I got my degree, my bachelor's in English literature, along with a bunch of creative writing at the University of Oregon, all for that purpose. And then I realized I needed a job, so I ended up in the business world for many years. So it took me a long time to come back around to actually sit down and be able to take the time to put together a novel, develop the maturity and the work ethic.
Sure. So what was your first foray into a full-length novel, Hammerhead, or had you written full-length novels before and this was the first one that you published, or what's the story behind that?
This is the first one. Like I say, I had a lot of short stories. I had a lot of ideas for novels. I'd started a lot, but I'd never really gotten very far. And so I had been the operations manager at a local blood bank here in town. And my wife and I got into a situation where we could finally afford it, and she'd always wanted to see me take it on. I'm really thankful for her. And so we sat down one day and we said, well, let's go for it. So I left my job, and I picked one of the short stories I had. It was a short story called Scrapyard. And I decided to blow it into a novel because I knew it would be kind of an action novel, and it might be kind of an easier theme to attack as opposed to something that had a lot of, I don't know what else. It just seemed like it would be a good one for me to take on, and that turned into Hammerhead.
Sure, and then that book, Hammerhead, seems like it's really resonated with veterans. Why is that?
Well, the main character, Jeffrey Holt, is a veteran from a war that happens 40 years before Hammerhead takes place. I wanted to deal with a hero that was a little different than the usual hero, so I took a 60-year-old man that's kind of a nobody working in a scrapyard recycling spaceships that are crash-landed in the Nevada desert. He goes out in a big mechanized suit, tears them apart. And when he tears away the cab of one of the ships that's supposed to be autopiloted into the desert, there's bodies on board. So he climbs into the cab, and one of the bodies grabs his ankle. But so what I wanted to do with that character was kind of deal with someone that no one expected would be able to do things. And as I developed that character, I started laying in the elements of post-traumatic stress disorder and how much war had affected him negatively with survivor's guilt and things along those lines. Because, when you look at veterans and how they cope with the experiences they had, sometimes you'll have veterans that never even did anything themselves. They didn't do any, thing that someone would say, well, that's really tough that you had to deal with that. But just being in the situation, maybe even seeing someone else do something that was harsh, they take away survivor's guilt, and it can be very traumatic for them. So in dealing with those themes in Jeffrey Holt, I think I had a lot of people from the Vietnam era. I even had somebody from the Korean War get in touch with me who could really relate to that character. They're older, they've moved on with their lives, and yet still they have these echoes from 40 years ago that are interacting with their lives today. And when I got those feedbacks, I came to realize that the reason Hammerhead had got onto the bestseller list is because these veterans were the ones who were recommending it to their friends. And that's when I decided, well, if they're giving back to me, I need to do something for them, because I really do believe in these folks and the sacrifices that they're willing to make. And that's when I decided to start doing the donation to vets. Yeah,
no, that's really awesome. Did you expect Hammerhead to do as well as it did?
No, not at all. I thought for sure that it was going to be a quick action novel. They always say it takes, 10,000 hours, maybe 10 years of hard work to develop mastery of a subject. And I had expected Hammerhead to be something that I could, self-publish and give to my friends and have them read it, get some feedback on it, and go back and work to the other one. And I remember watching the bestseller lists, and I was looking at Hammerhead one day just to see, if I'd gotten any more reviews. I think I had maybe 20 good reviews. I was looking at it, all of a sudden I saw at the bottom it says bestsellers rank, such and such, like 83 or 87 on the top 100 sci-fi and fantasy for Amazon. I was like, what does that mean? So it was really a huge shock to me.
Yeah. So how has that impacted then your career as a writer, having this initial success? Because to me, it seems very rare. You don't hear many authors come out with their first go round. And that's not to say you didn't put in the work years before. You had mentioned that you've been writing your whole life. But to say that essentially the first book shipped is such a resounding success, how has that impacted your career as a writer?
It's a really important thing. I was talking with a guy named Nathan Lowell, who's a really good independent science fiction writer. If anyone's interested and haven't heard of him, he's somebody to look at, Nathan Lowell. But I was emailing with him, interacting with him. I got the opportunity to do an anthology called Walk of Fire with him, and so I met him. And I talked to him. I said, hey, I'm kind of struggling with how to deal with this. I realized that success early sometimes can be detrimental because you might have your expectations set wrong. And it is difficult because there's so much. It can be very addictive to be on the bestseller list. All of a sudden you're on the bestseller list and you start watching your rank all the time and you start seeing the reviews come in. And there's a lot to learn there. One of the things is no matter who you are, if you get up on the bestseller list, somebody's going to try and knock you down. You're going to get some one-star reviews that you read them and you think, well, did they read the same book? So there's some learning as far as having a thick skin, letting things go. There's some learning about when it does fall off the bestseller list, how do you feel? And I'll tell you, you don't feel good. It's so addictive to be feeling like, man, I'm really successful. And all of a sudden you fall off and you're thinking, oh, man, how do I get this thing back up there? What do I do? What do I do? And so it is, it's a challenge. And it wouldn't seem like it's a challenge. It's one of those things where you think, well, to have those problems would be good, but it is a psychological toughening that you have to go through and realize, okay, well, now I'm back to square one. I need to sit down and start writing again. I don't need to worry about the sales of that book. I need to just get in there and start working again. And like you mentioned, it's important to mention, I did do a lot of work. I was the kid in high school. We used to have to wrap our books in butcher paper at our school. They made us wrap all our textbooks in butcher paper to protect them. And mine had stories written on them. Everything I had notebooks and notebooks of stories, so I was always working on it. So I've been working on it a lot, but it just happens to be the first thing I put out there kind of triggered with people. So
what is your routine like? How do you enact the discipline to write a full-length novel and in such a quality that it sells and the people want to read it?
Oh, yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question because that is really, really important. And the answer is going to be different for every single person. So one of the things that they say is you got to write hundreds and hundreds of hours. But one of the things that you're doing as you're writing those hundreds of hours is figuring out what your process is. And it's different for every person. For me, I figured out that I have to write in the morning when my brain's sharp, and I have to do breaks. So what I do is I sit down at 8:30. That's when my workday starts. I sit down at 8:30, and I write for 45 minutes. That first 45 minutes is a free write, and then I write 1,000 words of rough draft as fast as I can. I mean, anything. I'll just see, okay, I'll imagine a scene, and I'll write the 1,000 words. Sometimes I'm focused on something, like I might be working on I'm doing a serialized fiction right now, where I write a scene, and then at the end of the scene I ask a question, like, does the border agent let the person through or not? And then I give that to my emailing list. And then everybody responds to me and they answer the question. It's totally democratic. So whatever they decide what happens next, I write the next scene that way. So I work on maybe the 1,000 words of that situation. And then I go into editing. I'll work on editing. But when my 45-minute timer goes off, I set a 45-minute timer. When it goes off, I get up and I set another timer for 15 minutes. And I go and I do something physical. I've been trying to learn to play the piano, or I'll clean around the house. And then when that 15-minute timer goes off, I go straight back, sit down another 45 minutes. And I do that for 4 hours. And I can actually keep going. So that's 3 solid hours of editing, writing, whatever it is, in the very beginning of my day. And it's taken me years to figure out exactly not only how I work best with those 45-minute increments, but developing the self-discipline to make sure that I do it. And what that is do I really want to do this? And when I had Hammerhead do well, and then it fell off the list, and I was feeling kind of down because it was off the list, I went through this whole emotional reaction of, do I really want to be a professional writer? I could just go back to the business world. And I had to go through that gauntlet of emotions and realize, yeah, I really do want to be a professional writer. And then when I realized that, that's when I got really serious about scheduling my time and getting to work and being really strict with myself.
That's awesome. I really like your process too, and just the psychology behind it, because I think initially if somebody were to look at a writer's process, or any professional's process, creative process, every single one is unique. And I think sometimes people look at it superficially and say, well, that's what I have to do. But I like that you pointed out that this is, very much, it's unique to you, and it took you a while to figure it out. Even to essentially, you're figuring yourself out as an artist, as a creator, and figuring out where you're most optimal. Would you say that's true?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely critical. Everyone's different, and they say, okay, well, what do you have to do? You have to outline. Now, if I outline, I destroy my story. I cannot outline. I have to just write it. Just like, what was it? I think it was William Faulkner said that what he does is he imagines interesting people and then chases them with his pencil as fast as he can. That's how I have to write. What that means is I have a lot of editing to do because I end up with really, really, really messy rough drafts. But if I try and clean it out beforehand, I get so self-doubting that I shut it down. Now, other people, they have to lay it all out before they write the scene. So it's really, you got to figure out what's right for you.
How long did it take you before you found out that, no, this is the process I have to do? I have to avoid outlining. I have to accept that I'm going to create a lot of writing that's going to require a lot of editing, but that's my process. When were you like, this is my process, and you were certain of it?
I did National Novel Writing Month. I'll be honest with you. Some people don't like that. I do it every year, National Novel Writing Month. Anybody who's interested in writing should try that out if they haven't done it, because it's really interesting, because it's a way of exploring that really messy way of writing. Even if you're an outliner, you should just try different things. It's like if you're in martial arts. Oh, I've always just done karate. It's like, have you ever tried Jeet Kune Do? Have you ever tried jiu-jitsu? No, I never have. You might love it 10 times more, or you might not like it at all. So you should try these things out. Well, for Hammerhead, it took me 2 years to write the rough draft of Hammerhead, because I kept going, and I'd go back, and I didn't quite like this, and then I'd lose motivation, and maybe I'll change this. Hammerhead Resurrection is the sequel to that I've been working on. It's twice as long, and I wrote the rough draft in 3 months because I developed my process so much better. And for me, it's a matter of if I look back at all, I start doubting what they're doing, and I start editing those scenes, and I lose like Faulkner said, as far as chasing interesting people, I lose the interest in the story. And if I can keep that interest going, it really does well. One of the things I do is, if I'm right in the middle of a really interesting scene, I'll stop myself before that scene's over. So the next day, when it's time to start again, I really want to know what happens to the people, as opposed to having the scene closed, and then I have to reignite the fire.
Yeah, no, it's great. I'm curious. I had read, I forget which author brought this up, and maybe it was Stephen Pressfield in War of Art. He made some reference to something that I always really appreciated. He said something like he kind of fell in love with his characters that he was writing, to such a degree that like he was saying that, he'd rather spend time with his characters than, say, out socializing or something like that. And that might be, misinterpreting it, but I think that was the general gist of it. Have you found anything like that as a fiction writer, that you've just been so enthralled with the characters that you're creating, and you find them so interesting that I guess almost to the degree that they could be more interesting than other people in real life? I don't know, maybe that's a bad way to put it, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and they do become very special to you. A lot of people wanted me to write a sequel to Hammerhead. I kept getting requests. They wanted to know what happened to the war 40 years before. They wanted to know what happened to Jeffrey Holt when he was young, because I referred to it kind of very lightly in the book, and I got all these requests for that. And honestly, I didn't really know if I had a sequel in me. I didn't even know what to do with a sequel. I ended up going 10 years in the future when the background on Hammerhead is that an alien race showed up, got into a war off planet, maybe at Saturn and Mars. There was a huge war that never reached Earth. And I wanted to play on the theme like with the Nazi Holocaust, where some people say it never happened. And I've noticed that as we get generations away from a certain war, it's easy to forget how bad they were. And so I had this whole political group of people that were saying the war never happened, that it was just a political farce by the military to justify themselves, and that all the veterans were just people that had memory implants put in. And Jeffrey Holt was supposed to be one of these people. So there's a whole question in Hammerhead of, is he crazy or was it real? And so what I wanted to do is move 10 years in the future and actually bring that alien race back twice as strong, and then have the war go to Earth and see what happens when they fail. See how the Hammerheads were this elite flight group that were genetically modified to be able to handle really high G-forces. What happens if they fail to protect the Earth this time? So it's kind of turn it on its head and see what happens. And that's what happened was I didn't really know if I wanted to revisit these characters. I felt like their story was done. And the minute I sat down and started writing a scene with Stacy Zach and Leif Holt and Jeffrey Holt, oh man, I wanted to know what they were going to do. How much had they grown? I was very curious about them. And it was really kind of a strange experience. Somebody said once of Herman Wolf's War and Remembrance that it was a really good book, and he knew it was a good book because he found himself wondering what they had done with their lives after the book had ended. And yeah, you do tend to do that. Now, me personally, I'm really social, so being a writer, one of the challenges I have is it's really hard for me to sit in an office all by myself and write. So by the time I'm done with my 4 hours of writing, I'm itching to get outside. And I do jiu-jitsu, so I can't wait to get down to the dojo and see my friends, and I really need that face-to-face interaction. But I have heard of people, and like I say, everybody's different. I had a friend that got the chance to talk with George R.R. Martin, and she said, how do you keep all these people straight? And he says, because I live in Westeros, it is my reality. So he's one of those people that, he'd much rather be in Westeros with his characters than be with regular people.
Yeah, I just find that very interesting, which I guess begs the question then, what do you draw on for your creative inspiration? You mentioned jiu-jitsu. Is that, do you get creative inspiration from doing jiu-jitsu, from doing martial arts, or do you listen to music, movies, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of, like with Scrappy Art, the very seed for Hammerhead, I was in the shower. And a lot of people say their creative time is in the shower because I think you kind of hit a zen state when you're sitting there, just staring at the hot water. But I just saw a guy stand on the Nevada mountain ridge, and a spaceship just streaking in over the ridge and slamming into the desert floor. I don't know where it came from. That's interesting. Let's explore that concept. So I sat down and I started working with the scene where the ship goes by, and then, okay, well, what happens in there? So the seeds, I don't know where they come from. And I think when you start out as a writer, a lot of people, they just kind of, something triggers them and they feel like, that's kind of interesting. For me, I've got a lot of the underdog, and I do throw in a lot of martial arts. I've got formal rank in 7 different martial arts because I got bullied a lot when I was a kid. I was real skinny when I was in high school. I moved around a lot. So I think there's something to be said with your underlying psychology. And it's really well expressed in Zen and the Art of Writing by Ray Bradbury, because he talks about what we really need to be writing about. I think people sometimes trigger it, but we need to ask ourselves what we're really afraid of, what we really love. Those things are really, really strong emotions. We need to ask ourselves in our own hearts what those things are, and then dig those up and see if we can find out. Like there was something about how he was really afraid when he was a kid of merry-go-rounds. And that's where Something Wicked This Way came from. Is like, how creepy can a merry-go-round be? And for me, a lot of my themes come from being that kid that got pushed around and I was the underdog, and et cetera, et cetera. And what would it be like if I got to interact with one of my bullies today, after so many years of training? And then I get to play that out in a story. So...
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's really fascinating. And I haven't read that book, but I definitely want to pick it up, The Zen and the Art of Writing. So I guess, I'm curious too, kind of coming back towards, at the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about your initial success. I had meant to ask you this. Has that success shaped how you're planning on delivering this next book, both in terms of marketing and sales and your expectations for how well it will do?
It would have a year or so ago. I was really freaking out about, okay, I've got to make sure to put someone back on the bestseller list. I've got to make this work. I've got to make this work. I was really freaking out about that. And that's one of those things I had to calm down. And it's almost that Zen state. They talk about how you have to forget about your target while you're still moving towards it. It's a real strange state where you have to let go of it. I got a chance to talk with a guy named Robert Dugoni, who's a New York Times best-selling criminal thriller writer. And he said that his brother-in-law was a really famous portrait photographer. He's photographed Mick Jagger. He's photographed Bill Clinton. And he said to him in a dark time in his writing career, if you focus on the money, you'll lose your dreams. If you focus on your dreams, the money will follow. So you really do have to forget about that whole thing. Now, I was talking with Nathan Lowell via email, and I was having a hard time because I was trying to figure out how to market my books. And I was saying to him, I don't know whether I should advertise on Google. I don't know if I should try and do this. I should do that. What should I do? And he wrote me back and he said, first thing, I always remember this, the first 3 letters was first thing, stop. And the whole idea was, don't worry so much about marketing your work. Get out there and write. Now, I can't remember who it was, but someone talked at a writer's conference. I was reading a book on writing, and they talked about a writer's conference. And the guy came out, famous writer, and he said, how many people in the room want to be writers? And, of course, every hand went up. And he said, what are you doing here then? Meaning that you should be at home writing.
Sure.
So, yeah, it's really one of those things where, me personally, I've had to let that go, try not to worry about it too much, just keep writing and just see what happens. Yeah,
absolutely. Are you planning on self-publishing this, or have you had any publishers contact you? What's your deal with that?
That's a big question. Right now, I'm trying to stay independent, trying to be a self-published author, because if I wanted a boss, I could just go back into business. I can go back to the blood bank and say, hey, you need an operations manager. I don't really want a boss. I want to do it myself. And it's cool because I actually own my own business now. I created my own publishing company. I've got Kimura Publishing, LLC. I run my sales through that. Marketing expenses come out of that. And the way things work right now, Nathan Lowell gave me a really good, I keep coming back to Nathan Lowell, but he's such a nice guy. He was so helpful to me. I'm glad to use his name a lot. He gave me his model for success. And he's actually a fairly successful independent writer. And what he does is he works on friendships. So what he does is he makes sincere friends. He even said to me, it's not about Facebook friends, it's about real friends. And these are people that he interacts with, he has solid relationships with, he talks to them, he'll interact with them. And those people go on his emailing list. And so when he writes a book, right now he says he only has about 1,000 people on there. But they're people that know him, and he knows them basically from interacting online and email, and maybe even he knows them face to face. So what happens is he writes a new book, he puts it out there, and then he emails his 1,000 people, and those 1,000 people in the next couple of days go and buy it, and it launches him up into the bestseller categories where other people see it who don't know him, and then they go ahead and buy it. And I thought that was interesting because when I was interacting with one of my readers, and I said, hey, do you have any good writers to recommend? He immediately told me that I should read Nathan Lowell. So what happens is people start recommending him to other people, but it has to be sincerity. It's not a matter of, okay, I've got to collect 1,000 names and then I'll be successful. You need to give as much as you get from these people. You really need to have a solid relationship with them. And I like that. That's not, see, the beauty of being independent is I make more money off every sale. You'll get, $1 if you're published off every book sale, but I get 70% off of mine. So I can run much lower sales and have a much closer relationship with my reading group. And I really like that. So that's why I'm trying to keep that going, is because I don't want to get this big barrier between me and my readers.
Absolutely. And I actually see that trend more and more. I'm sure it's been there for a while, and I know relationships have always been important to the artistic community and everything like that, writers, artists, anybody creating something. But more now than ever, I think it's essential to create those relationships. What made you think of doing the serialization, doing something like that, kind of getting into and connecting with your audience that way and asking them for feedback? What made you think of that?
We get a lot of feedback from people after the fact. Like Iron Crow. I write Iron Crow, I polish it and I smooth it down and I get it out there. And then people write back and say, hey, I really like it, but what about this? And I really like this, but what about that? And I thought, what would be strange if during the process, like every scene, I had some feedback. And so that was what spurned it. And what I'm realizing is there's another really important factor of it as well. It's really, really hard to write a scene that's good enough to give away, but I'm not editing. Because like I said, my process is I can't go back and edit on these things, so I can just do a couple quick edits. I tend to take too long editing, so it's kind of a personal challenge to be brave enough to give stuff to people that's maybe not finished product. And they need to accept the fact that it's not going to be perfect. But so it's kind of a challenge for me as a writer to grow a little bit and see what happens. And
has the response been positive from your readers?
Yeah, so far. Actually, I haven't given the first scene away, so it's just starting now. But it is, so far, the people are really excited about it. They want to see the first scene. So,
I guess I'd like to wrap up by asking you a kind of general question. You probably get it a ton. But, if you were, sitting in front of an audience of, people who wanted to be writers, right? Maybe in that kind of context, they're at a writing seminar or something like that, or any kind of creative. What recommendation would you have for them, for the person just starting out?
Oh yeah, thank you for asking that. I really like doing that because of the mistakes I've made in the past. If I can go back to 16 years old, when I really because when I was 11, you're kind of silly and you're just doing this and that. 16 is where I really started getting it into my heart. If I could go back to being 16 years old, the one thing I do differently is write every day for at least 5 minutes. Without fail. Every single day of my entire life, even Christmas Day, Easter Sunday, whatever it is, 5 minutes. And if I had done that, I think I'd be 15, 20 years ahead of where I am right now. So if somebody's interested in being a writer, there's 2 pieces of advice I always give. Go home tonight and write for 5 minutes, and then do that again as long as your heart's beating. Don't ever skip it. 5 minutes, it's easy to find. Unless something horrible happens that day. But the other thing is mentorship is critical. So you need to be reading about writing. From, like you say, War on Art is a great book to read. You had mentioned that. What was the author's name again? Stephen
Pressfield.
Yeah.
Big fan.
Yeah, that's a good book to read. Zen and the Art of Writing is good. I have a whole list. If anybody's curious about good books to read, they can shoot me an email. I'd be glad to share them. I've read a lot of them. But just 5 minutes a day of reading. So 5 minutes a day of writing, 5 minutes a day of reading. And then you do that, and you just can't go wrong. But the reading's got to be positive and constructive. So if you start reading a book and it says, oh, it's really hard to be a writer, close the book and throw it away. Read the books that are energized and positive.
Excellent. I like it. Really good advice. Well, Jason, where can people catch you? Are you on Twitter, your website, and your books? Tell us a little bit about where people can reach out to you and connect with you and also get your products.
The core of my universe there is www.jasonandrewbond.com. I threw my middle name in there to kind of separate me from James Bond. I didn't want people to think I was writing spy thrillers. And I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, and like I say, one of the things I'm really excited about is this serialized fiction I'm doing, where I'm going to do a scene and have everybody tell me about it, and I'd like as much feedback as I can get. So if anybody wants to get on that, they can go on my website, sign up for my emailing list, and then once a month I'm going to shoot out a scene, and they can vote on it. And I'd like to have as much input as I could, because it's going to be a big challenge, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that that's in the show notes, and people can reach out to you and be a part of that and see how it works. So, Jason, thank you so much for being here with us today, man. It was really great talking to you.
Tom, I appreciate the time. I thank you for letting me be part of your work there.
And that concludes today's broadcast, Broadcast 16. If you want to see the show notes, go to tomworkus.com/broadcast16, and that's the number 16. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed today's broadcast. And if you did, please leave a rating and review in the iTunes store. Thank you in advance for your support. As always, this is Tom Workus. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Thank you for listening to In the Trenches. Your creative work doesn't stop here. Join the resistance, the small but growing army of entrepreneurs and artists putting a dent in the world at www.tommorkis.com. Never fight alone. Join the resistance.